Okay, so welcome back to the Dream Space with Max and Collette, and we're here to speak to you all about just more about how we're approaching this group through the Jungian lens, and in particular our up and coming course. We're going to speak today more really about the individuation process and about Jung's work and why people do Jung's work. And I'm going to be asking Max a series of questions that might just help us try to understand more what we mean when we talk about an individuation process or doing the Jungian work, as we so frequently hear, or being a Jungian. So I'm going to start off by asking you, Max, what would you say, Carl? Why would you say that Carl Jung's work is still so popular now? Why do you think it's gathered so much accolade in both the spiritual world and the psychological world?
I think that, I mean, just Jung as an historical figure was, um, he was always considered a bit of a mystic um, because of what he brought in terms of, concepts like the collective unconscious. And he wrote quite a bit about UFOs and about ghosts, poltergeists in particular. So his works are vast, and in the vastness of those works, you will find a lot of mystical explorations. To say that made him spiritual, well, his father was a priest, and he came from a very rich religious family life. So he naturally would have taken on his father's complexes and would have taken on that religious drive that his father brought to the house, with him being a priest. So on the fundamental, in the essence of it, the psychological essence of it, there would naturally be a propensity for Jung to lean towards the religious function. And he even spoke about the religious function as one of the key functions that exists within the human psyche. So the difference between a function and a complex is that the function are our basic instincts. And Jung expanded those instincts that were initially discussed in the early versions of psychology, being sex, hunger, shelter, basically the Maslow hierarchy of needs. And he expanded to the religious function, the creative function, the artistic function, and he expanded these functions that human beings need. They absolutely, it goes beyond just desire. They need to feel religiously fulfilled. So in my case, to kind of bring it home, is I live in a Jewish neighborhood. And every Friday and Saturday, I see Jewish families walking and, obeying the laws of the Sabbath. And I sometimes laugh at it and think, you're being possessed by your complex, but it's actually far deeper than that. They actually are being possessed by one of their functions. It's just like a hunter would be possessed by their hunting function when they go out and hunt, 70,000 years ago. So the same kind of concept. And that's why I think there's so much read into Jung's work about spirituality, is that there is a lot of that comes through his work. A lot of his in his body of work, he explores it. He explores those kind of functions. But I think just to say a bit more is that I think because so many people have studied Jung, and there have been schools that have, been formed in Jung's name and in psychoanalysis names, that a lot of the work has been appropriated in what is loosely termed like the New Age thinking. And people have appropriated concepts and ideas from Jung's work and are using it in the New Age styles and the New Age philosophies. And those styles and philosophies, those adaptations of his work have sometimes found fertile ground in groups and cults and in schools, like the school that I come from, the Center for Applied Jungian Studies. So there are these misappropriations and there's the appropriations, which, as we know in Western culture, we're very good at appropriating knowledge and wisdom from other cultures. Jung, obviously being European, it would be remiss of me to say if we appropriate his culture, but it's certainly an interpretation of his work. And I think there's a lot of spirituality and a lot of what I always define as kind of bringing meaning to our lives. By understanding ourselves better, we bring meaning. By having understanding ourselves, we bring deeper meaning to our relationships. And that's really what, for me, what the work is about, is that to live a life that has no meaning it's sterile.
Yeah.
It's it's all just materialism then, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
mean, wouldn't you say that? Wouldn't you agree with that? You've been on the journey with me.
Yeah, like that's how I fell into Jung work, was through the spiritual and mystical path that I was on. I kept bumping in to the theory, I kept bumping into the new age, interpretations of it, and I tried to read the books many times, and it was just like the language was just inaccessible for me, really. I didn't really know. I had to, I got a set of the black books, and I think I read the first 10 pages of the first black book 20 times, and I was like, whoa, like, what does this actually mean? I need a school to help me understand the language in the book. And yeah, that
Exactly.
meaning for me came through life, through that spiritual connection, through that religious complex of mine, through being able to find something that gave me meaning in life other than work. Because work, when I'm doing work that I love, I find meaning out of it. But I've got another aspect of my life now that gives me great meaning, and that's to investigate the self, to understand myself, my behaviours, how I'm interacting with people. And it just brings a real richness to life. I'm seeing every situation that I'm in as a lesson, or something being tried to make conscious to me. And so I don't get bogged down in oh, this is happening to me. I'm like, okay, what's this trying to show me? Like, what am I learning about myself here? So it adds a deep meaning to my life, for sure. It definitely does that. So I think, like, what I wanted to really separate in what you were saying is that new age thing is, we see it all the time now. I'm seeing the shadow spoken about a lot, and it's deeply misunderstood by those groups. They they're looking at the shadow like bad behaviors, for example, rather than like the deeper complexity of what the shadow is. And just doing, I see a lot of people thinking they're doing a lot of self work on the shadow, but we know that it's far more complex to get there, to it, to see it, to make it conscious. And that's what Jung's work does. It helps us see how we get into that. It's not just something we can sit in a room and say, okay, my shadow is this, which is what the new age is doing out there. So yeah, I think it just brings this study. It's a study, isn't it, to life?
It's a self-study, exactly. But I think to expand, and I know we are going to speak on this soon, is that what it's done is it's given you, and it's given me, and it's given the people who I've been at the school with, and at many schools, it gives us a language to define what was before undefined. So when something, say, comes up like a bad behavior or a repeated pattern that we didn't see coming, we can then start naming it. And through naming it, we can define it. And by definition, we're creating a language for ourselves. And that language has a way of drawing meaning, but also it has a way of creating new patterns. And that's why, dream interpretation, it's about the language that we use to interpret the dream. It's not always just the symbols themselves.
Yes.
Or the metaphors in the dream.
Yeah.
It's actually if I look at my dreams, how deeply personal are dreams? I mean, they're deeply personal, but without the language that defines those symbols and those metaphors through the Jungian lens, it becomes, well, it can actually become meaningless. And that in itself is a pity, because there's an opportunity for self-improvement and self-growth.
Yeah. And the Jungian work itself, like when you're trying to access it through the text, the language, it's like reading a foreign book. It's like reading a different language, and that's why I couldn't access it. And that's how we collided. Is I stepped into the work. I entered a group and a course, and was like, okay, I need an access point to understand what the language is that's being spoken here. And what I found, Max, was that like with our group that we're going to try and hold with people, is that the language starts to be like slowly interfaced into the group. You start to learn the language slowly. And it actually really helps with expressing yourself. You can start to express what's going on. It helped me feel less. I always wanted to be so open, and I always felt when I was so open. But I realize now in hindsight, I just didn't have any language to communicate what was going on, what I was feeling, what I was trying to process. And now I've been able to learn a new language and a new way of communicating. I feel much more seen and open, and working in the group and working with you on what we've done in the past is really kind of, I feel like I'm not screaming in a paper cup anymore. I'm actually being
No,
heard. Yeah.
and and that's the thing about the new age. That's what frustrates me about these new age courses, is that the people who facilitate them believe that they've got the secret language. So if, for instance, if we work with something as controversial as, say, clairvoyance.
Yeah.
Now, Jung wrote a lot about clairvoyance, and a lot has been written about clairvoyance. I mean, you've even done clairvoyant work in your past. But the thing is that like a palm reader, or like, those kind of peeking through coins or bones, whatever, is that they're using a language that subtracts from the other person's process. But the other person is almost believe that that somebody can see something that they can't. But it's only because they have that language. And that to me is the biggest problem. And I think even Jung himself had a problem with it. It's like, I'm just going to give you the language. Here it is. Read it for yourself, interpret it.
Yeah.
Take it on board for yourself. And that's what individuation really represents, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about saying, here is a pool of knowledge and information. Now go on the journey.
Yes.
I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to withhold information. That's where the two roads divert from each other. The new age diverts from the individuation or the enlightenment or whatever the process is.
Yeah.
It diverts there when the information is then removed from the process.
I had a discussion
Doesn't
about
work.
this in my women's group that I hold, and one of the girls was going through a process, and she was like, I've got to go to we were talking about pedestaling, and like me sharing as the teacher in there my wounds and the processes I go through, my hurts and my pains, as a way to equalize the the balance in the group. And the teacher was talking about, the girl was talking about the inner guru, and there's a lot of new age been slapped onto that. But in the individuation process, the inner guru is that place in you that goes into the deep self-inquiry and the analysis of the self, and has the language to be able to explain it exactly as you've just said there. So I think it takes the guru, the pedestal teacher, out of the equation when you're doing the Jungian work, because you're not looking at the teacher for answers. You've got to go in to get those answers. That teacher's just kind of going, go this way, go that way, do a little bit, and you have to bring it forward.
Yeah, I always remember one of my teachers from long ago said, you know what guru means or stands for? I said, what? He said, G-U-R-U.
Yes. Yeah.
And I never got that. I never got that in the moment, because I thought, well, that's just, you just oversimplifying, or, we all need gurus. But actually, the truth of the matter, we need guides, and we need people who climb off the pedestal and walk the journey with us, or lead us for a certain point before we can start leading ourselves. And that's the point. A lot of this work is founded on those principles. That here's the lexicon. We'll join a course, or come on a course, or join our school, or come into this. And the lexicon, once you have it at your disposal, then it becomes your chance to pass on the mantle to the next group.
Yeah. And I relate this to like learning anything. If you're learning the piano, you're learning Spanish, you take a teacher, the teacher gives you the guidance, gives you the tools, tells you what they've learned, depicts the musical notes, and then you go off and you fly with it. So yeah, it's a really self-empowering tool to have this work for me, definitely, and in the spaces where I'm not working within the groups or with you, then there's just this continuation of the work where my own psyche's still playing that with that Jungian ball, and it it carries on. So we're on about this, like, guru and enlightenment, because we're all seeing in the outside world, the external world, the gurus falling and being exposed a lot, and everyone's seeking for that Eastern word enlightenment, and people get that mixed up as well. What is enlightenment? Like, what's self-realization? What's enlightenment? But when we're talking through a Jungian lens, we're speaking about individuation. Can you just frame that word? What does individuation actually even mean?
I wish I had a quick answer for you, but I don't think. To me, it's a journey. It's a path that you kind of plant yourself on it. So for me, my individuation process started many, many years ago when I read Siddhartha. And I read this book by Hermann Hesse, and I was a very angry young teenager, and I just couldn't find a container for myself, for my soul. And I read Siddhartha, and it kind of launched me into it. And then when I came to Jung, I started reading about individuation. I thought, well, this has really been inside of me the whole time. And that process, I think each individual has to come to it. So just to give it some definition, individuation is not individualism. So now I'm trying to become an individual. Yes, it entails something to that effect, but you first have to come to who you are individually. So what are my complexes? What is the internal workings of my psyche? What is the internal workings of my desires, of my processes? And will that then lead me to a higher meaning, a higher self? So it's a kind of soulful journey. It's a journey that you take with your soul. And I think that that's really what Jung was pointing to, is that you have a soul, and that soul needs to be nurtured throughout your life. Do we ever individuate? Maybe there have been individuals across history who have. Maybe you could say Buddha or Christ. Maybe even our own Nelson Mandela at some point became a truly individual human being, where he was distinguished and distinguishable by who he was. And he had taken his individuation very, very seriously, even though he was incarcerated for 27 years. His self-development, self-growth, his inner healing, his ability to change his mind, to be plastic, as some neuroscientists call it, this plasticity. It's all of these things start coming into the house of the journey of individuation. To be not so ingrained in the myths and the fictions that you tell yourself. Yeah. Those things are the things that keep you kind of slipping away, slipping through the cracks of your psyche. So individuation really is about that self-development, that coming to yourself, coming back to yourself, then moving forward with yourself and coming back to yourself. Yeah. Like if I had to be completely ingrained in my complex, there's no plasticity there, right? So I can say I'm fluid. I want to be fluid between my complexes, my creative complexes, my teacher complex, my Jungian complex. And that fluidity helps me to start developing and redeveloping and growing my inner soul, my inner psyche.
Yeah, yeah. So I read this week, it's the art of personal transformation. And I really like that. And, for me, and it was something I wanted for you to expand on in relation to that. It's about making the unconscious conscious. And we've seen it in our groups and stuff that we've run before, this kind of want always to bypass that unconscious matter that is trying to come through. And I have it in my groups, Max, where everyone wants to make everything pretty. They want to positive everything. Like if it goes into a negative, they want to positive it. They want to make it frilly. They want to make it fancy. And of course, the individuation process doesn't allow for that, really, does it? It means going into those places that your psyche, your unconscious is trying to pull forward to you, because they're saying, look, you can't miss this, because if you do, you're going to get into trouble. So a lot of the New Age, a lot of spirituality, bypasses that unconscious matter. And that's what I wanted to talk about, really, is what the Jung focuses on, that unconscious matter. And why is that so important? Why is that the focus of what we do as well?